All right, remember what the trajectory that Badawi was going through. He was going and saying over and over again, follow that trajectory. He first made a claim that there's no need to look at manuscript evidence. Remember that? We don't need manuscript. This is something that the Christians have a problem with. We don't need manuscript. And what do we need? What was his solution? Memory. All you need is memory. Why in that agenda? Why is he going to memory?
Because we don't have manuscript.
Exactly. He realizes he cannot support the Quran manuscriptly. That's why he has said we need to use memory. You're going to see this now with the Muslims you talk to. They don't want to talk about manuscript evidence because they know that they don't have the manuscript evidence. After what we looked at yesterday, we saw that all the manuscripts are from the 8th, 9th, and 10th century. None of them are from the 7th century. More than that, there are not 100,000 of them. There's not even 100 of them. In fact, there's not even 6 of them. There's only one. And that's the Topkapi. That's all they've now been reduced to. So they're reducing it little by little. We're pushing them into a corner, and the more we push, the more that they're now reducing what they're going to defend. Which is fascinating because it makes our job a lot easier. You all don't have to really take on anything except the Topkapi. We're going to destroy that in November. Now, what am I saying about November? I've said this a few times. A few of you asked me, you came up and said, what are you talking about this November? In November, they're going to release the Quranic Gateway. All of you need to get it. It should have been released last year, but they're making sure that everything is accurate on it. The Quranic Gateway is going to be the largest software anywhere that deals with the Quran. It's going to have all the translations built into it. It's going to have the English translations, all the different versions of the English Quran built into it. It's going to have a word study on every word of the Quran. So you can just plug in any word you want. It'll show you graphs of where that word is found and all through the Quran. It's going to have a concordance built into it. This is the first time we've had all of this built into one software. And it's being done by a number of our scholars who belong with SWAT, which is the group I belong to. We all work with Rabbi Zacharias Ministries in Atlanta. And there's 25 of us. All of us either have our doctorate or are doing our doctorate. Those of us who have our doctorate are helping those who are coming up with the doctorate. And all of us are doing doctorates on Islam. And all to do with historicity, destroying the historicity of Islam and other areas, politics and whatnot. But it's the ones who are working on the Quran are the most exciting. You can see why. Because we're making an enormous amount of headway. Now, I'm not going to give you their names. You don't need to know who they are. You'll know a few of us who are around the world, but I can give you at least 2 of them, 3 of them, and that is myself and Dr. Keith Small and Dr. Dan Brubaker. We're the ones who are working on the Quran, and we're the ones, and Dr. Andy Bannister. If you know Dr. Andy Bannister is the one that's actually put together this software out of Scotland. So this is going to be released in November. Now what we've done is we've taken all the manuscript variants and embedded them into the software. We're up to around 4,000 of these manuscript variants. And these are all consonantal variants. All of them are consonantal variants, which means this is the razm. This is not the diacritical marks, not the dots above and below the lines. Those were only created in the 9th and 10th century. We're talking about 8th century razm variants, which are in 7 different areas. These are insertions, thousands of insertions, thousands of erasers, thousands of coverings where they've covered the entire text. Sometimes a whole paragraph is covered with writing over top of it. Sometimes whole sentences are covered over, and tapings. And that's what we're going to look at. Is we're going to look at these. We're going to see them. They're all going to be, you can put them on your computer so you can actually show your Muslim friends it. That's how easy it is. On top of that, we're going to make slides, and that's where my job is with Al-Fadi. We're putting together slides, and Dr. Solomon, Sam Solomon in the United Kingdom. We're putting the slides together so you can look at each one of the variants alongside the Hafs Quran. That is the canon. Remember the canon? We've just heard about the biblical canon. They're all getting upset with the fact that it's not till 393 that we finally got our canon written together. When do you think the Quranic canon was finally finished? 1924. It took them 1,300 years to get the Quran together as a canon. So what is this problem with 393? Now, more than that, we're going to be showing in every one of these variants next to the canonical text, which is the Hafs text, the 1924 text, so that any of you who don't even read a word of Arabic can see the difference. Okay? You can see the difference. You don't have to know Arabic to visually see the difference. We're going to circle the words that are put in. We're going to circle the lines. We're going to underline them so you can show your Muslim friends. Then we're going to transliterate them, and then we're going to translate them so you side by side. all in English, so every Muslim will see just how damaging these manuscript variants are. Making it as easy as possible, so the work is all being done for you, sorry. Now that's coming out in November. Can you see how easy it's going to be now to pretty well destroy the Quran? Well, the next thing is, of course, getting you all to get it out into the world, so the whole world sees it and use it. Now, knowing that, can you now see what Badawi is going to do next? So let's go ahead on higher critical method. This is what he answers, and this is attack against the Bible.
The first question that some people might say is that you people seem to be approaching the Quran in a way that is really different from the so-called high criticism of the Bible. And the problem is really a problem of perception. You see, if you happen to have been a Western scholar belonging to Judaism or Christianity, and when the high criticism began, 18th, 19th century, continued ever since, to verify the authenticity of the Bible, the only way that anything of the Bible, Hebrew scripture or New Testament, could be verified was nothing but manuscript, something in writing. Not even original, in the original language, because there is no complete copy of the Gospels, for example, in the Aramaic, the language in which Jesus spoke. These are translations. We don't know even what the originals were. So biblical scholars, if they say we want to make an objective research, they had absolutely nothing to stand upon except what can be proven mainly in manuscripts. So they go back and say, all right, what are the oldest manuscripts of the Bible available in museums? What archaeological discoveries might confirm or disconfirm? And the debate continues. I think some of you might have seen in recent issues in the Time magazine and others in the last few years, discoveries that negate things or confirm things, because there is no other way of verification. But it is rather curious that a lot of Western scholars and Orientalists who are critics of Islam and critics of the Quran want to impose the exact same methodology on the verification of the Quran in the name of objectivity and free historical scientific research. If, like I said earlier, if all the copies of the Quran were burned down, the Quran would have remained. The Quran would have remained exclusively through memory. In fact, I must add one point that some might not be aware of. Do you know even what kind of script was used in recording the Quran at the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Those scripts did not have dots. And you know the dots are very important. If you have just something like this, you wouldn't know whether that is ba if you have a dot underneath, or ta if you have two dots on top, or tha if you have three, or if you have one dot, it could be noon. You get my point? Number one, there were no system of dots to distinguish letters. Secondly, there was nothing which is called diacritical remarks. You know, sometimes you get marks on the Quran, like this is fatha, kasra, hamza, shadda, the various ways which would make a difference in utterance. But what I'm saying here, that the Western scholars try to project something which is suitable only for their scriptures and require that that must be done also.
Do you see a problem with what he just said? Where's the problem here?
People will know where to put
Wait a
the
minute.
marks.
What are diacritical marks? Are they fatha, dhamma, and kasra? No, they're not. He's completely confused the diacritical marks with the vowelization. And yet he is the best they got. And his language is Arabic. Can you see he's confused not only the vowelization, but he's assuming the vowelization are diacritical marks, when he's just described what the diacritical marks are before the vowelization. Aren't you follow that? No? None of you pick that up?
I didn't catch it until he said it.
Did you catch it?
No.
Do you catch it now?
Yeah, yes.
I thought you were going to say he wants us to use a different standard of evaluating our scripture
Can you
than
make it full screen?
evaluating
Yeah.
Quran.
No, I'm just saying, we're going to get to that. But have you noticed that he's completely confused the diacritical marks with vowelization? Now that's an error that no Arab scholar should be making. And yet that's his native tongue, especially someone of his caliber.
In the case of the Quran, whereas, like I say, even if somebody tell you, okay, I can produce, this is impossible, but suppose somebody, I can produce you the entire Quran that was written at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it would have not been enough to preserve it. Because you don't know how to pronounce it. B, ba, ta, tha, jim, ha, kha, also is contingent on the dots. What preserved the Quran, what is unique into it, is memorization. And it's only through memorization and through the early people who were really fit, that was their language, that was their bread and butter, that you know exactly how the ayah should be recited. But in addition to this, we must say that even if you come to the notion of memorization, which some people find it impossible, how could you depend on memory of people to preserve over 6,200 ayahs in the Quran? We notice, first of all, number one, that while writing was known among Arabs, and after Islam and the writing of the Quran, of course, it became more widespread than before. While writing was known, the majority of Arabs depended on memory, before Islam even, to memorize or preserve their lineage. They depended on memory. History, they depended on memory. Poetry. There's one story, whether it's correct or exaggerated, but it's quite revealing of the strange ability of people to memorize. It says that someone went to his friend, he was a poet, and he told him, look, I got a brand new long poem of 100 verses. Of course, that's a great deal of source of pride. So he said, all right, recite it to me. So he started going on through the 100 verses. And the man, his friend, said, oh, you're telling me this is new? He said, yes, I just finished it. He said, no, it's not new. I heard it before. He said, I challenge you. So he went reciting the exact 100 verses as they are. He said, no, it's not new. He said, I can't believe it. He said, no, it's so common. He called his wife behind the curtain and he said, did you hear about the poem about such and such? He said, yes. He said, what does it say? And she went exactly through the 100 verses. The man got mad. He said, oh, I can get you. My servant. He heard it by now 3 times, and he recited all of them. Of course, like I said, regardless of authenticity of the story, but it at least carries some essence of the amazing ability of the early Arab. Of course, because their obsession with poems and beautiful expression. And when the Quran came to challenge all that eloquence, obviously, it really captured their attention.
Fascinating. The only proof text you can have that memory is greater than writing is that last story. And notice what he said, regardless of whether it's authentic or not. He pretty well just destroyed the whole point he was trying to make. The fact that he had to use a story about a woman and a man and a servant, yet he said, regardless of whether it's authentic or not, it's proof that memory is better than writing. Do you agree with that?
No.
How many of you have been used Chinese whispers at a birthday party? Whispers is when you start and say something to Daniel here, Daniel tells it to his friend, and by the time he gets over to here, what I tell Daniel and what she tells me are 2 different things. Within a period of just 10 minutes, you can get an entire...
Telephone game, welcome to America.
Chinese whispers or telephone. Can you see the difficulty of what can happen within 15 minutes? Can you imagine what happened over 200 years of oral tradition? Because this was not written down for 200 years. So that's the problem right there. I see that. Now, let's continue on. He not only got, if regardless of the authenticity of the tale is his only proof that memorization is stronger than written text, and misdefining diacritical suggests his poor command of Arabic, his native tongue, then why did he go to Al-Bukhari in volume 6, 509 and 510, and spend 16 minutes trying to defend the preservation of the written text? Did you pick that up from what we did yesterday? He spent 16 minutes trying to defend the Uthmanic text, and yet now he's saying we don't even need all of that, all we need is the memory. And the only proof text he could prove that memory was authentic was an inauthentic tale. And this is what you're going to get with an awful lot of Muslims. They just completely contradict themselves, and they shoot themselves in the foot. Moreover, what did they memorize? We have no manuscript from that century, and all of those from the 8th are incomplete. They disagree with each other and disagree with today's Huff's text. The only reason why he can say that both the woman and the man and the servant all knew the same text is because there was a text they could refer to. And that text has only been given authority for the entire world since 1985. It's only 33 years old. Which means an awful lot of you in this room are older than that Quran. If you weren't here yesterday, you don't know what I'm talking about. Number 3, memorization is nothing more than oral tradition, which is open to embellishment, like telephone has vocab likes to impose on me. Now, let's go to number 9, and this will be our last one. It's only 2 minutes long. It's real quick, so we're almost done here.
Number 2, the Quran was not like other scriptures. If you look into the comparative religious aspect of it, you find, for example, that the Torah was largely available to the rabbis and the doctors of law. You know, they teach the public, but they are the ones really who keep, you know, the law in their hands. If you look at the history of Christendom, for example, you find that even when the Bible was put into writing, usually manuscripts were only available in the hands of the scholars, the priests, the clergy. And as you know, especially in the Catholic, among Catholics until relatively recently, it was not regarded as appropriate for a common Christian, for example, to read the Bible on his own because they said he could get confused or get the wrong message. So he just goes to church, sit, listen to the priest, making selection and teaching them what to say. It was, of course, as you know, Martin Luther who raised this issue that every Christian should have access to the Bible. It should not be a monopoly of the learned or the priests. But we'll talk about centuries after that. But the case of the Quran was quite different. The Quran was revealed not in secret, not with a few select companions of the Prophet ﷺ, but wherever he was, traveling, sitting in the battlefield, and everybody's present in the masjid, and everybody's hearing and watching what's taking place. But more importantly, that it became a religious duty on Muslims and a praiseworthy act to memorize the Quran. You go to Bukhari, for example, when we talk about Fada'il al-Quran, a whole chapter on the virtues of the Quran and other books of hadith, and see the amount of ahadith in which the Prophet ﷺ encouraged people to learn the Quran, to teach it to their children, to have their children memorize it. Some of you might remember one of the famous hadith, خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه. Very eloquent. خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه. The best of you is one, he or she is the one who learns the Quran and teach it to others. So that was a source of immense encouragement for all people.
Okay, what has he done wrong here? What was he describing concerning the text of the Bible? When was it that the clergy and the priests controlled the text?
Up until the Reformation.
1500s, right? So he was comparing 1500s with the first century of Islam, am I correct?
Yes.
He completely misconstrued how the Bible was put together. The Bible had nothing to do with the clergy, had nothing to do with the priests, and almost, in fact, as what Edward just got done saying, remember what Edward said? Almost immediately, as soon as the Bible was written, it was mass-produced, was it not? And sent to every church. And it was translated from the very beginning. Why did they translate it? So that everybody could hear it in their own tongue. It was only later in the 1500s that the clergy controlled the scriptures when Martin Luther put up his 95 Thesis on Wittenberg door and said, sola scriptura, that means come back to the Bible again because you priests have gone and you brought in the book of Tobit to create purgatory and the whole thing with indulgences. This has nothing to do with the Bible. And the first thing that Martin Luther did in the Reformation was to translate the Bible in German so that the common man could read it for themselves. That began the beginning of the proliferation of modern-day translations from the Reformation on. So that today we have now 2,500 translations. How many translations of the Quran exist today? And when you translate the Quran, can it be translated?
No.
No, it cannot. On my Quran over there, and on in front of every one of your Qurans, it's nothing more than, what does it say on your Quran? Doesn't say translation. But just read the top front. The meaning of the Quran. There is no such thing as translation. The Quran cannot be translated. So just the opposite of what he's saying. And that's the beauty of the Bible. From the very beginning, it was meant to be for the common man. That's why they wrote it in Greek. They didn't write it in Aramaic. They did write it in Hebrew just for the Jews. They wrote it in Greek because that was the lingua franca of the first century. Just like English is the lingua franca today. Now, writing in Greek proved it was for the common man and translated immediately. Conversely, look at the Quran and this asks what happened at the very beginning of the Quran. Was the Quran written for the common man? No, exactly the opposite. Remember what he said yesterday. Yeah, go ahead.
Is Aramaic itself able to be translated, or is it just the Quran written in Aramaic?
You mean Arabic?
Arabic, yes. Sorry. Unable to be translated.
Every language can be translated.
Okay, so what is it about the Quran that cannot be translated?
It is God's holy language, therefore it cannot be translated.
That's why?
That's exactly what they're saying. There is no other, I mean, it's fascinating that Arabic suddenly is unique to every other language. Why is it that we can translate the Bible into every language, including Arabic? Have you noticed we do have an Arabic Bible? In fact, we have about 3 or 4 different translations of the Arabic Bible. So why can the Christians do what the Muslims cannot? So it has nothing to do with translation. It has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with this is God's holy language. It's an elevation of the text. But when it was created, and this is what he did admit yesterday, when it was created, you did have different people with different texts. Remember, we had Ubay ibn Ka'b's text, which was very popular in Damascus. You had Ibn Mas'ud's text, which became very popular in Baghdad. You had Ibn Musa's codex, which became very popular in Basra. And then you had Zayd ibn Thabit's codex, which became and was retained there in Medina, which then became the Quran that we use today. Fascinating. Who was the one that destroyed all those 4 metropolitan codices? And we now know another 11, according to Arthur Jeffrey, that existed from within the traditional account. Who destroyed all those manuscripts? Was it the common people? No. It was the caliph that destroyed them, right? And what did he do? He burned them all. Just the opposite of what he's saying. So this was very much controlled from on top, very much controlled by the authorities, destroying everything else and retaining only one text. Just the opposite of what he was saying. Had nothing to do with memory. Where is this memory he keeps bringing into it? I think the reason why he's coming back on memory over and over again is because he knows he cannot support that written text. Thank God we don't have to depend on the Bible for memory. I don't trust memory. I don't trust my own memory. Now listen, you saw what happened this afternoon. You can see that memory, look at what good old vocab. He got Corinthians mixed up with Colossians. Thank God we don't have to trust on his memory. And that's why we have a written text. And the reason we know when people get it wrong is because we have a text in front of us. And our text has been there from the very beginning. This is not a Western paradigm that we're imposing on Islam or on Arabs. They're imposing it on themselves. It is not us that have said that they had a text to begin with. It is not us that wrote Al-Bukhari. It is Al-Bukhari who said that a text was written within 2 years of Muhammad's death, had to be rewritten within 20 years of Muhammad's death, and all that had been written earlier to that time had to be destroyed by a fire. And it's the Muslims who then, in 1924, took all the ones that disagreed, the 31 different ones of the Arabic Qurans that disagreed in Egypt, there in Cairo, and they sunk them into the Nile in 1924. They're still there today. We do not destroy our manuscripts. I don't know of any case anywhere in 2,000 years where we have taken the Bible, burned them, or drowned them. Only Muslims burn and drown. Thank God we don't have to worry about that. Isn't it great to be able to defend the Bible? Isn't it so much easier to have to come back on these kind of claims? And thank God we don't have to go to memory. We've got the Word of God, written in black and white, 27 books that have been around for 2,000 years. God bless you. Thank you so much.